All right, everyone. The other day, Yang was tweeting, and actually, this went viral probably because it was so preposterous, wanting donations in order to get up to the 3 million donations mark. Now, Yang is stubbornly in between 5th and 7th place, depending on the poll, usually somewhere around 6th. He's sort of at the Klobuchar level, a bit behind Bloomberg, so he's not really viable. He's never been viable. He's never hit a higher mark, despite doing okay, at least at the debates. He's never had any bump from those. At some point, if it weren't for the fact that he's got that small, fervent group of people funneling him some money in order for him to run what is usually a bare bones campaign in most parts of the U.S., he wouldn't be able to be in. Now, I think I know why it is. Andrew Yang realizes that if you're a unique personality and charismatic enough, you can use the fact that you're on that debate stage, the fact that you're in the race, to garner huge amounts of attention. Now, what this can do is you can be like, let's say you're pragmatic. Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, knows she's not going to win the nomination to be president. But there's no reason to drop out. She's getting a lot of attention. She does attention-seeking things specifically because she's setting up for a longer-term political career. With Andrew Yang, he's making a fairly decent amount of donations. He's got enough support to be visible, at least with that core fan base, and he's basically like selling books on mathematical and money topics, I guess. The UBI is communism, soft communism. Think about it this way: if you were to suggest giving out $1 million a month instead of $1,000 a month, what would happen? It's just a different variant of the same idea, but you see what it would ultimately do. 99.9% of the population would be fundamentally equalized. It would be essentially, you would have achieved one of the goals of communalism at that point, which would be interesting. You also would fuck your economy and your currency, the same as you would with $1,000 a month, but people overlook this. Now, this is just the Mo welfare thing, give the poor a few more breadcrumbs from the rich man's table thing the Democrats do anyway, on steroids. And so by making that suggestion and by using terminology that most people weren't aware of before this election, most people hadn't really heard of UBI or didn't know what it was, by making that case to people, he's managed to get 3 or 4% of the Democrats to actually support him. The idea, though, that he's going to be the nominee is preposterous. Here you've got someone who doesn't have any of the qualifications to be the president of the United States, especially economically. One thing I would caution people on is a candidate that's pegging their campaign primarily to changing things economically is going to be outperformed by most other classes of possible candidates in an election year where the incumbent's main advantage is in money. That is, that if Yang were the nominee, or arguably Sanders, because a lot of the things he wants are basically economic reform, when you think about it, reform being a loose term with no meaning here when I'm using it, of course. You think of these candidates, most of their platforms are fiscal. They're related to money, jobs, free stuff, welfare, income, things of that nature, taxation. That's a bad strategy if you're going up against Donald Trump. It would be much better to have a candidacy that's rooted in civic moralism after a fashion, literally orange man bad, although you have to be able to make that case coherently. There aren't that many Dems doing that at the moment. Foreign policy, certainly you could suggest changes to that. You could also outmaneuver Trump and have a hyper-populistic platform. No Dem has thought of this yet. Yang's big thing, though, is UBI. That would be about the weakest possible central platform for a candidate going up against Donald Trump. To people that actually support Yang, and there are actually people who like him, I think it's more about his personality or the idea of getting a free monthly stipend of other people's stolen money from, upper echelon incomes, which would fuck the upper middle class, by the way, as well as most of the solid middle class. But it would make it so if you gave everyone $1,000 a month across the board, and it's not clear whether he means people that are paying taxes, productive individuals, or simply everyone, he'd probably start giving it to illegal aliens as well, because he's part of that particular crowd when it comes to immigration. What you would do is you would take the lowest echelon of society and the lower middle class, and everything there would be compacted and equalized. People at the top don't notice because to them the money is nothing. People at the very bottom aren't going to notice any difference because they're still at the bottom, You've simply brought other people that were a little bit above down, actually. You'd do this with raising the minimum wage too. You would actually expand poverty. You would simply decrease the severity of the poverty. The problem is anyone in the working or lower middle class or in the upper margins of the middle class, those two groups of people get fucked disproportionately. Anyone in the productive center of the economy, essentially the 80%. They're not in the top 10%, they're not in the bottom 10%. Everybody else gets fucked. That's what would happen under Andrew Yang's economic policies. It's a crazy idea, and I thought I lost all possible respect for him, because I can at the very least understand if someone's tinkering around in their mind with a concept like UBI. It's been, sporadically tried and it's failed everywhere, but if you were to try to say, well, I really want to help people or whatever, okay, well, at least, there's a noble reason behind why you're proposing it, although I don't know that that's actually the case because it can't read minds, but I lost all respect for him around the time that he, in the wake of that one shooting, there's like, oh, I thought of my children, and he breaks down crying and rambling about how we need to ban guns. It's like Michael Bloomberg couldn't have pulled off that bait and switch bullshit as well as you did, Yang. It's funny. But no, he's not going to be nominated. I mean, at this point, it's sort of like a lot of these other candidates are doomed too. Like Bloomberg, he's not going to be the nominee unless Joe Biden croaks and Buttigieg manages not to capitalize on the situation. So Bloomberg's basically DOA. Kamala, who, a month before she was truly done, I declared would be done, she's out now. Beto was never, going to amount to anything. Klobuchar is doomed. The idea that she has a couple of good debate performances and magically becomes the nominee. Dude, Kamala Harris's people are totally hitching their wagon to Klobuchar now. They're looking for any female candidate other than Warren. Warren's now slipped to third place and she's still falling. Sanders is now stabilized, almost 10 points behind Joe Biden. Isn't the writing on the wall about who the candidate is likely to be simply because of a packed field? Now, of course, one of these mid-tier candidates could drop out before Super Tuesday, clearing the way for somebody else to maybe grow into the ability to fight off Joe Biden. Otherwise, the writing's already on the wall as to what's going to happen here. Don't take a rocket scientist, dude. As for Yang, he and Klobuchar are in the same club, people that have garnered small audiences. But even if all those people at the bottom joined their numbers together, like everyone Bloomberg and Point South, they still wouldn't be the front runner. I mean, come on. Yang struggles in most polls to achieve 3 or 4 points. It's sort of like Gabbard struggling her way upwards of 2. New polling looks like she might be at 2 points now. Wow, she's viable. Oh, Yas Queen Slay, she can do it. Next president. But that's not actually going to happen. That sort of long shot thing doesn't really occur. Joe Biden's always been the front runner. He's got a couple of potentially viable contenders. If they can get their act together, score a victory in one of the first couple of states inexplicably. Sanders, if he can manage to hold New Hampshire, at least remains viable. Warren does well enough in Iowa, maybe wins the state. Buttigieg comes out of nowhere, he grabs Iowa. This can happen. But for anyone south of Bloomberg to even pull into the top 3 at this point, I think in any of the starting states, is unlikely. The thing is, if they stubbornly stay in until Super Tuesday's done, and then the field clears, by then Joe Biden probably has racked up a commanding enough lead to basically be cemented as the nominee. At that point, anyone on that low-ish tier, like a Yang or Klobuchar, only holds on to grab a handful of delegates here and there and potentially be a kingmaker in some sort of political backroom dealing when the DNC decides who the nominee is. That's the only reason to continue. And anyone south of them wouldn't have any delegates, so they wouldn't stay in at all. California's delegate rich. I believe that all the states are proportional this time. I think they decided not to go with, like the Republicans, some of the states are proportional, some are winner take all, some are like half and half, and it's a really kind of a weird system where the states definitely have disproportionate sway over their own sort of results, whereas the Democrats have federalized theirs. I think they're all proportional now, and I think they've eliminated most of the caucusing and rendered them almost all to primaries as well. They've really sped up the process. They made it very streamlined and efficient, although it's very, very much federalistic bullshit. That's about all. Peace out.